She gave him love when no one else did. He repaid her with something she could never imagine. The sun filtered softly through the curtains of a modest, single-story home on the outskirts of Indianapolis. Inside, 84-year-old Hattie Daniels sat by her kitchen table, a cup of black coffee warming her hands. Her home was nothing grand, a small, weathered structure she had lived in for over half a century. The paint on the walls had faded and the floors creaked underfoot, but it held a lifetime of memories. Hattie's life had always been one of giving. She had worked tirelessly as a nanny for decades, raising children who weren't her own while balancing the demands of her own family. Her days began early, ironing tiny uniforms and preparing breakfasts, and ended late, soothing cries and reading bedtime stories. Many of the children she cared for came from families who barely noticed her, but there were a few who saw her as more than just a caretaker. Her routine now was quiet, almost too quiet. The kids she had nurtured had grown up, moved on, and faded from her life like chapters in an old book. She spent her days in this tiny home, flipping through photo albums and tending to her small vegetable garden in the backyard. Her life was simple, and though she didn't complain, there was an emptiness in the quiet. Among those children there was one who stood out, a little boy with a shy smile and a hunger for attention that went unnoticed by his own parents. His name was Elijah. Hattie often thought about him, especially on days when the loneliness felt heavy. She had mended his torn jeans, braided his unruly hair, and cheered for him at every school event his busy parents couldn't attend. She hadn't heard from Elijah in decades, but she still prayed for him, hoping life had been kind to him. Her day was shaping up to be like any other: coffee, gardening, maybe a trip to the corner store. But there was something different about this morning, a faint flicker of expectation she couldn't quite explain. But Hattie couldn't have known that today, her life was about to change in ways she never imagined. Across the country, Elijah Harper stared out the window of his private jet, lost in thought as the plane descended toward Indianapolis. The world knew him as one of the most influential black entrepreneurs in the nation, a self-made billionaire whose tech empire had transformed industries. But behind the polished image and carefully crafted interviews was a man shaped by a childhood few knew about. Elijah's success story had been told many times, the scrappy kid who rose from humble beginnings to conquer the business world. Yet in every retelling, one crucial figure was left out: the woman who had saved him when he needed it most. Growing up, Elijah's home life had been far from stable. His parents, consumed by their careers and social ambitions, were rarely around. Hattie Daniels, the family's nanny, became his anchor in those turbulent years. She didn't just look after him, she nurtured him, taught him, and gave him the kind of unconditional love that no salary could ever buy. He remembered the little things: the way she'd slip an extra pancake onto his plate on tough mornings, how she'd stitch his favorite hoodie when it was falling apart, and the stories she'd tell at night, weaving lessons about kindness and resilience into every tale. Hattie had been his safe harbor, and her wisdom had followed him into adulthood, guiding his decisions and shaping the man he became. But as Elijah's career skyrocketed, life pulled him further away from the people and places that once defined him. He had thought about reaching out to Hattie many times, but the whirlwind of his success always seemed to take priority. Until last month, when he saw a photo in an old box of keepsakes. It was a picture of him and Hattie on the front steps of his childhood home. She was holding him close, her smile radiating warmth, and he looked happier than he could remember. The image brought back a flood of memories, and with them, a pang of guilt. How could he have let so much time pass without thanking her? Elijah knew what he had to do. He didn't want to just send a gift or write a letter. Hattie deserved more. Something that would show her just how much she had meant to him. As the plane touched down, he felt a mix of anticipation and nerves. The woman who had shaped his life didn't even know he was coming. But Elijah wasn't sure how she'd react, or if she'd even remember the boy she had once called her little lion. The sound of gravel crunching under tires pulled Hattie from her thoughts. She peered out the window, expecting the mailman or a delivery truck, but what she saw made her pause. A sleek black car had parked in front of her house, its tinted windows gleaming under the midday sun. Hattie wiped her hands on her apron, curiosity tugging at her as she shuffled to the door. Before she could reach it, a tall, sharply dressed man stepped out of the car, a bouquet of lilies in hand. It took her a moment to recognize him. The broad shoulders, the confident stride, they were familiar, but different. And then it clicked. "Elijah?" Her voice trembled as she opened the door. "Hi, Miss Hattie." His smile was warm, but his eyes glistened with emotion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Hattie was frozen in place, her mind racing to reconcile the little boy she had known with the man standing before her. Elijah broke the silence, stepping forward and handing her the flowers. "I've been meaning to come by for a long time," he said softly. "I'm sorry it took me so long." Hattie's hands shook as she accepted the bouquet. "Oh, my Lord, Elijah, is it really you? Look at you. You've grown into such a handsome man. I can't believe it." They embraced on the porch, the years melting away in that single moment. Hattie's mind flooded with memories of Elijah as a child, his shy laugh, his love of puzzles, and the way he'd always look for her when he needed comfort. "I've thought about you so much," she said as they stepped inside. Her modest living room hadn't changed much since Elijah's childhood. The same floral sofa, the same framed photos lining the walls. "I've thought about you too," Elijah replied, taking in the familiar surroundings. "This house, it feels just like I remember." They sat together, the coffee table between them now holding the bouquet, and an old photo album Hattie pulled from a nearby shelf. Elijah leafed through the pages, smiling at pictures of himself as a boy. "You were always there for me," he said, his voice heavy with gratitude. "When no one else was, you were." Hattie reached across the table and patted his hand. "Oh, child, you were always special to me. I loved you like you were my own." For hours they talked, sharing stories and catching up on decades of life. Elijah spoke of his journey, his struggles, his triumphs, and the lessons that had stayed with him. Hattie listened intently, pride swelling in her chest. But then, Elijah's tone shifted. "Miss Hattie, there's something I came here to do," he said, sitting up straighter. His hand reached for the pocket of his blazer, pulling out a slim envelope. But before he could explain, Hattie's heart skipped a beat, her mind racing to imagine what could possibly be inside. Hattie stared at the envelope in Elijah's hands, her fingers gripping the armrest of her chair. "What's this, Elijah?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and caution. Elijah smiled, though there was a glimmer of nervousness in his eyes. "It's something I've been planning for a while," he said, sliding the envelope across the table. "You gave me so much when I had so little. This is my way of saying thank you." With trembling hands, Hattie picked up the envelope. Her heart pounded as she carefully opened it, pulling out a single sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the words, and for a moment, she couldn't process what she was reading. "Miss Hattie," Elijah began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "This is the deed to a new house. It's yours, fully paid for. A place where you can live comfortably for the rest of your life." Hattie's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Elijah, no. No, this can't be real. This is too much," she said, her voice breaking. Elijah reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "You've always deserved more than this house," he said, glancing around the room that had aged along with her. "You gave everything to make sure I had a chance, even when you didn't have much yourself. I wouldn't be where I am today without you." Hattie shook her head, overwhelmed. "I never did anything expecting something in return. I just loved you, that's all." "And that's why you deserve this," Elijah replied. "Because love like yours, it's priceless. It's what kept me going when I wanted to give up." You taught me how to dream, how to believe in myself. This is the least I can do for you." He stood up, gesturing toward the door. "I want to show you something." Hattie followed him outside, where another car had pulled up behind Elijah's. From it stepped a real estate agent holding a set of keys and a large folder. Elijah handed the keys to Hattie with a smile. "This is for your new home," he said, pointing to the photos the agent held up. "It's a beautiful place not too far from here, with a garden out back and everything you could ever need. You'll never have to worry about fixing a roof or paying another bill. It's all taken care of." Hattie's knees felt weak, and Elijah quickly caught her, guiding her to sit on the porch steps. Tears continued to pour down her cheeks, her words lost in the overwhelming flood of emotions. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "I've never had anyone do something like this for me." "You don't have to say anything," Elijah said softly. "Just know that you've changed my life, and I'll never forget it." The two of them sat there on the porch, hand in hand, as neighbors peeked from behind curtains, trying to piece together the extraordinary scene unfolding in front of them. For Hattie, it was as if the weight of years had lifted, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude and validation. But even as the moment sank in, she couldn't help but reflect on the lessons she had passed down to Elijah. The same ones she realized were now coming back to her in the most incredible way. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Hattie and Elijah sat together in her living room, the bouquet of lilies now in a vase on the coffee table. The conversation had softened into a quiet reflection, the kind that only comes when hearts are full and words feel almost unnecessary. "You know," Hattie began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I always told you that life isn't about what you have, but about what you give. I never thought those words would circle back to me like this." Elijah nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "You didn't just say it, Miss Hattie. You lived it. You showed me what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. That's a lesson I've carried with me every day." Hattie's eyes misted over again, but this time they were tears of pride. "You've done more than I ever imagined, Elijah. Not just with this house, but with your life. You've turned those lessons into something so much bigger." Elijah leaned back, looking around the room that had once been his sanctuary. "It's funny," he said. "When I was a kid, I thought success meant having a big house or a fancy car. But now, I realize it's about moments like this, about the people who've helped you along the way, and making sure they know how much they matter." Hattie smiled, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You've got a good heart, Elijah. That's what matters most. And you've reminded me that even the smallest acts of kindness can leave ripples far beyond what we can see." The two sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the day settling in. Outside, the sound of crickets filled the air, and the streetlights flickered on one by one. As Elijah prepared to leave, he turned to Hattie with a final thought. "You know, Miss Hattie, I don't think I'll ever stop trying to repay what you gave me. But I also know that no matter how much I give, it'll never compare to the love you showed me when I needed it most." Hattie stood, her frail frame straightening with quiet dignity. "You've already repaid me, Elijah, more than you'll ever know." As the door closed behind him, Hattie sat back down, clutching the keys to her new home. Her heart was full, not just from the gift, but from the realization that the love she had poured into others had come back to her in ways she never expected. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that in a world often consumed by what's fleeting, it's the moments of compassion and connection that endure. So, as Hattie looked out at the night sky, she whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not for the house, but for the reminder that true success is measured by the lives we touch. This story is a powerful reminder of the impact of kindness and gratitude. If this touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Share this video with someone who might need a little inspiration today, and remember, kindness always finds its way back.